how did you start doing the session?
It started as, like if you were around engineers and producers in LA, mid 2000s, these things started to appear. And what had happened was that, all of those original recordings were done on tape, and the tapes either, if you're the Universal Music Group, you allow 100,000 of them to be set on fire by accident. And if you're, because that's care. And if you're not, and you simply have these tapes, the tapes start to disintegrate over time. So they have to rebake them in these ovens to get the plies of the vinyl of the tape to actually stick back together. And eventually they fall to pieces. So what happened was they would send them to these archive houses, and with no oversight. And engineers at these archive houses would be like, am I looking at fucking all of the 7 greatest Fleetwood Mac songs of all time, and nobody's sitting here? And they would slide them onto a hard drive and leave. And then all of a sudden you start to see engineers, when you'd go to a recording session or you'd be hanging out with somebody, and they'd tell you that they'd be like, "Yeah, man, I got Fleetwood Mac," and be like, "Oh, I got the Who," and you trade them. So this whole underground started of trading these things. And I had been working. When I came out of the radio experience, I started at the same time that I was at Sirius. I started producing records indie, and then did a couple for Island. And so I was working with Pro Tools and getting these things, and I built a pretty good library. And when I was on Sirius with Jason Ellis, the skater, we did a show together. And when we were also in a joke band that started out as Tony Hawk's Taint Stick, and then became Taint Stick, and then went from Taint Stick to Death, Death, Die, because we got signed to the Cottonmouth Kings record label. And they proceeded to rip us off as labels do. So we broke up due to artistic differences, and then reformed the next day as Death, Death, Die. And then proceeded to get on the iTunes charts with these fucking ridiculous records that we made. And Jason would come to my house, and we would get high and be laughing our asses off. And he was a huge Pantera fan and a big Queen fan. So I would play him the bits. And I was like, we like this. I think, people would dig this. He's like, yeah, dude, people would dig this. He's like, can they come? Because he didn't understand. He was like, can you get them out of that machine and onto the radio? And I was like, yeah, dude, it's easy. I'll just put them into a Pro Tools file. He's like, mate. So I started doing the vocals with him on Sirius, and it was hugely successful.
Oh, I didn't know that. And then
I tried to do a full song with him.
Just the vocals?
Just the vocals. So I tried to do a full song with him, and his ADHD didn't really allow for it. And so he was like, yeah, mate, let's just go back to doing the vocals. And I was like, cool, whatever you need. And then when I will put it politely, when I left Sirius, when I was invited to not work for the Sirius Corporation anymore, I immediately called my buddy Andy, who was over at a place called The Sound, and I said, you guys posit yourselves as the radio station for music fans. And I was like, I think I have this fucking segment that could be really successful on that radio station. And I think that Mark, because it was Mark of Mark and Brian, was the morning show guy over there. They brought him back. And I was like, I think that Mark would be into it. So Andy went to Mark and told him about the thing. And Mark, bless Mark Thompson, is the single greatest gift in all of this stuff. He put me on the air sight unseen. He had no idea what I was going to do. And he said, yeah, bring him in. And I said to Andy, I was like, what's Mark's favorite band? And he said, Marvin Gaye. And I was like, oh, dude, I got this. And it was Heard It Through the Grapevine. So I went in on a Thursday morning. And the way Mark tells it, he's like, look at me. I'm like your worst nightmare in radio. So I walk in and he's like, what the fuck is this creature? And he said the moment that he knew that we were going to be okay was I flipped open the laptop and then I pulled out the white index card. And he looked at the white index card and was like, oh, this dude knows what he's doing.
Nice.
And then I proceeded to do Heard It Through the Grapevine with him. I get goosebumps talking about it, with him sitting next to me, and his brain, because Heard It Through the Grapevine is one of the greatest songs of all time. It's one of the greatest recordings of all time by some of the greatest players of all time, and sung by one of the greatest voices of all time. It's the planet smasher entry gateway drug for the session. And he lost his fucking mind and was tearing up during the vocal. And then when I came off the air and I was done, he looked at me and he was like, you're coming back every month to do this. And then the Sound, the program director of the Sound hired me, and he went into Andy, and Andy and I had been friends since Y107 days. And he went into Andy and he goes, oh, I got great news. I just hired Christian Hand full time and he's coming on and blah, blah, blah. And Andy looked at him and was like, congratulations, you've just hired the loosest cannon I have ever met in my life, and gave him keys to the building. And then I proceeded to make Dave Beasing at the Sounds life miserable for the 8 months I lasted at that radio station. And then they flipped. So while I was doing that, I was also making a record with somebody who then went on to become my girlfriend for Island, because that's a cliche that has to happen. So we would record all day, and I'd tell her, I was like, I'm not one of these guys that, at first, this is my apartment, and secondly, I'm not somebody who records until 6 in the fucking morning. I'm like, this is a job. Show up at 10. If at 6 we feel like we got everything and we're good to go, we stop. We'll meet up the next day. I'm like, this is a job. And but if at 6 we're still going, I'm not going to be like 6 o'clock. Stop being inspired. We'll just go until the inspiration stops. But and she was like, cool. So we'd finish at like 8. And on like the end of week 1, she was like, what do you do after I leave? And I was like, I just get high and listen to music and fuck around. And she was like, well, can I sit and do that with you? And I was like, yeah. So we'd get high, and I started showing her things. And we were hanging out one day, and she looked at me and she was like, it's a real bummer to me that we can't invite your friends and my friends into your apartment to sit and watch you do this. She's like, because I get a private show every night that's amazing. And I was like, you really think anyone would give a fuck? And she was like, dude, this would be really cool if you did this as a live show. And then at the same time, I'd sort of had the idea because I had gone to see this guy do a Beatles presentation, and it wasn't particularly, it was difficult to be. I won't talk shit about it. He does it his way. And one of the things I learned from his presentation was that it was all a PowerPoint, and it was scripted. And I could feel that it was something that he'd done a bunch of times. So it wasn't exciting, and it didn't feel dynamic, which is what it should feel like if you're talking about the greatest recordings and you're talking about music, which is so spiritual and so important. And it was a PowerPoint presentation. But one of the things that I noticed was he didn't have stems or tracks, but he had outtakes from those anthology series, like where there'd be like B versions and talk in between songs, and he would play those. And I watched the audience like re-engage because they were hearing something they hadn't heard before. Yeah. And I was like, oh, 2 things. A, this has to be improvised from the moment I walk on stage. This can't be scripted. I have to be as unaware of what's about to happen as the audience is, because that will keep it exciting. Even if I have to do a song like, Bohemian Rhapsody, which I've done 20 times, and I still haven't done the perfect Bohemian Rhapsody show. And the other thing I need to do is to understand how important people hearing these things are.
Yeah.
And the things have to be given the time that they need to be. There are examples on YouTube of people doing this, and they talk over the vocals, and and I'm like, you can't do that. So I learned 2 things, and then, so I was at the Sound, and I went to the program director of the Sound, and I was like, hey, I want to do a show at Atwater Village at Swing House, which was our friend Phil's place, which was beautiful. And I was like, I want you guys to rent, because I can't sell tickets, because I don't know what I'm going to be selling tickets to, because I don't know what this is going to be. I know that I'm going to have a screen with a Pro Tools thing and then I'm going to play the songs and talk. And I have a white index card. I don't know what it's going to be like. So I was like, will you guys, it'll be a sound event. Will you guys rent the thing, and then I can give away tickets for free, and that way we don't have to sell tickets. And they were like, okay. So I went on the air and I was like, hey, I'm going to do a thing, and I have no fucking clue what it's going to be. And I'm going to do Toto's Rosanna. And actually, I don't think I've announced the songs. I was like, I'm going to be doing this thing. And 150 tickets went. And I went on stage. And I heard it through the grapevine first, and then went back to the green room, and I was vibrating because I was like, this is it.
Yeah.
This is the thing that I've been dying to find my entire life, because this is all the things that I care about. This is all the things that I want to do. I love making people laugh, because as a traumatized human being, there's nothing better than getting people to not be traumatized. And I get to be a music fan, and I get to show people how much I love music and how much they love music, because they're going to be none of the songs I do are deep album cuts that nobody's heard before.
Yeah.
Unless you show up for a Queen Terror, where I'm getting you to fucking come to learn how amazing Pantera are by rewarding your patience for the first hour with some Queen. Most of the stuff is stuff that you're fully engaged in and already know, but you're listening to it in an entirely new way, and and the thing that I didn't realize happen is, because we're musicians and we've been part of the experience of creating music in a studio and working in that way, we already have like a tertiary EQ understanding of songs, and we can listen into them, and you could focus on a bass line. One of the things I didn't realize that I would do with this thing is teach people that skill. And so much feedback I get from people is like, I can now hear things in songs in a way that I couldn't before. And it was a transferable skill from song to song. They're like, dude, I could hear bass lines where before I couldn't find a bass line because all they needed to know was where that bass line sat in what they were listening to. And then the nice thing about the Jammcard ones was how many people, like Phil Lassiter, every single time would be like, dude, I got to go to the studio. I'm so fucking inspired. And then the other thing of like Phil's favorite thing was like, bro, I'm going to start leaving mistakes in.
Yes.
He's like, I'm going to stop fucking fixing everything. He's like, these motherfuckers had mistakes on his bum notes. There's people slipping out of time. I'm like, yeah, dude, humanity. So the whole thing rewarded everything that I cared about as far as music was concerned. And also was, you know, it's not necessary. I mean, it's more arrogant to make your band be the headliner on a tour that somebody else has booked. But there's the arrogance of being able to say that, you know, it was really nice, similar to you, and I think that's where that is one of the commonalities of our experiences, creating something that nobody has done before.
Yeah.
Because I can't fit into a Jello mold, man. I couldn't even be a fucking radio. I couldn't be on the radio, dude. I went to the Sound, and my first day on the air when they hired me full time, my Facebook status was, "Have you ever felt like you don't belong somewhere?"
Wow.
Because I looked around and I was like, oh, this is a death march.
Yeah.
Like, this is just same as fucking KLOS. That's a death march. Radio is a death march. There is nobody's doing anything. The newest thing to happen on radio was me.
Yeah.
That's not arrogant. That's a fucking truth. The newest element of a radio show to ever happen. Frank from, God bless him, Frank from Heidi and Frank was like, this is it. You know, when Uncle Joe Benson walked up to me and said, you are doing some of the greatest radio I've ever heard, because he came in. It was really beautiful, actually. I did the show with Mark for a while before I got the full-time gig, and Uncle Joe Benson is just a statuesque figure in radio history. And I would walk into the studio and I'd just look at him and be like, Warren Zevon. I'd be like, oh, Warren. I remember doing 3 hits of Brown Acid with Warren Zevon in a van driving back. For every single one, he had a fucking story for. Amazing. That was just insane. And I did Boston one morning, and the next day, that day I did Boston, and then I was sitting outside, and then he walked in, and he was like, I just did something I haven't done in decades. He's like, I sat in the parking lot, and I listened to you do Boston, and I wept in my car.
Wow.
Because my friend Brad had never sounded more beautiful to me.
Wow.
And I was like, the same thing with Mark Thompson. I was like, when these dudes who have literally seen all of it are walking up to you and being like, that is fucking, what are you doing? I knew that I was onto something.
Yeah.
And I had to, I think that's the hardest part of the entire journey. Like, so much of me is like, man, I wish I was fucking, just give me 10 years. If I was 43 right now instead of 53, and I had 10 more years of this, because I'm not going to be doing this at 63. I'm not the fucking James Lipton of music. And I was like, if I just want to be fucking 43. But the idea of like, it took to 45, which is when this thing really started, to carve out a place that was uniquely mine, because I couldn't find any other place to fit. I'm like a broken jigsaw puzzle piece.